The year was 1907. The naval history books call it a structural failure. The official report cites a rogue storm. But the truth of the USS Vanguard's vanishing is a deep, cold, and uncomfortable classified secret. The Vanguard wasn't sailing for war games. It was charting the geometry of the abyssal planar mission known only as Project K-47. Every log, every chart, every photographic plate concerning that journey was systematically erased. Within 48 hours of the ship's disappearance, we found the single, undeniable piece of evidence deep within the Office of Naval Intelligence Archive. A copper cylinder. This small, sealed container held a single, crucial philolog of acoustic readings, so terrifyingly regular that they defied every known law of oceanography. They detected an anomaly, a vast, rhythmic, manufactured sound pulsing from the deep ocean trenches. It wasn't seismic, it wasn't natural, and it was mapping the ocean floor in silence. This hidden truth suggests the Vanguard was destroyed not by nature, but by encountering the subject of its own research. The cylinder's casing was marked K-47 DNR. The file was stamped never open. Yet we begin tonight, by sitting in the deep, quiet cold of the archive. The light here is a controlled, low-level illumination, a deliberate choice to protect the aging paper and the fragile artifacts. The air is still dry, and carries the faint, nostalgic scent of iron and faded ink. The pervasive smell of history locked away. We are looking at a faded photograph of the USS Vanguard, a handsome, proud vessel of the pre-dreadnought era, comparing it to the stark, analytical language of the recovered log. The file is not digital. It is etched onto a fragile wax cylinder, its surface now dusted with fine archival powder. The information it holds is utterly encrypted by the technology of its time, a cipher requiring a key the Navy claims to have lost. The quiet hum of the archive's ventilation system creates a low background thrum, a constant, subtle reminder that we are far below the daylight. In the realm of preserved secrets, the concept behind Project K-47 was simple, yet strategically vital. In the early 1900s, global power was defined not just by industrial might, but by control of the seas. To control the seas, one had to understand them, not just the surface currents, but the geometry of the deep ocean floor. This knowledge was essential for future cable routes, submarine warfare, and most importantly, identifying defensible territories. Captain Silas Thorne, a man known for his intellectual curiosity and his quiet dread of the unknown, was chosen to lead the endeavor. The unit he commanded was not part of the standard survey fleet. They operated under special dispensation from the Secretary of the Navy, their movements largely independent of the main fleet. Their mission was specific: map the deep ocean trenches in the North Pacific, a region riddled with volcanic activity and mysterious, unexplained seismic silence. The equipment provided was revolutionary for its time: massive, clockwork-driven depth gauges and a brand new invention, the Analog Hydrophone. This crude but effective listening device was essentially a massive bell lowered miles into the water, designed to capture and amplify the sounds of the deep, recording them onto sensitive wax cylinders. The first 3 months of the survey were characterized by meticulous, painstaking work. The cold air of the upper deck, perpetually swept by the Pacific wind, contrasted sharply with the warm, cramped engine room where the recorders were housed. The scientists logged everything: whale songs, distant seismic events, the grinding of tectonic plates. Their early reports back to Washington were entirely technical, focusing on geological strata and hydrostatic pressures. A sense of quiet dread began to permeate the crew. Around the 4th month, they had reached the deepest target zone. Captain Thorne's personal logs, preserved only because his wife kept a duplicate of his correspondence, reveal a growing unease. He noted that the environment was unnaturally silent. The usual background noise of the ocean, the clicks, the pops, the distant groans, had vanished. It was as if a vacuum had been created, leaving only the sound of the Vanguard's own engines and the gentle, persistent creak of its hull. Then came the anomaly. The first acoustic signature was captured on a clear, calm afternoon, roughly 300 miles west of the Aleutian Islands. The hydrophone operator, a young nervous specialist named Ensign David Hayes, rushed into the captain's cabin, his face pale beneath the grime of the engine room. The recording was unlike anything they had ever heard. It wasn't random noise. It was a precise, low-frequency pulse, too slow to be biological, too regular to be geological. It was a rhythmic, almost mechanical hum. Dr. Elias Finch, the lead scientist, analyzed the His initial reflection was one of intense, intellectual curiosity. The pattern suggested a pulse rate of exactly one cycle every 4.3 seconds, repeated without variation for the full 15 minutes of the cylinder's recording capacity. The power behind the sound was immense enough to register faintly even when the hydrophone was only lowered to a few hundred feet. Finch initially theorized it was a massive subterranean tidal pump, a unique geological feature of the trench. But Captain Thorne, standing on the steel architecture of the deck, watched the glassy .com sea and felt a deep, abiding quiet dread. He ordered the ship to remain stationary and repeat the recording every hour. For the next 2 days, the pulse continued, unwavering, its source calculated to be miles beneath them, originating from the very bottom of the trench. On the third day, the pattern changed. The simple pulse was replaced by a complex sequence of clicks and tones, mathematically arranged. It was not merely rhythmic, it was informative. The sound waves were interacting with the surrounding pressure fields, creating a phenomenon Dr. Finch could only describe as intentional acoustic cartography. Whatever the source was, it wasn't just existing, it was mapping its environment. It was, in effect, a silent cartographer. Thorne immediately ordered a coded message sent back to Washington, reporting the discovery of a non-natural pulse of immense power. Classifying the information as code black, the response was instantaneous and unsettling. Instead of orders to investigate, the cable from the newly formed Office of Naval Intelligence only ordered an immediate total cessation of all hydrographic activity and a return to port. The ONI memo, later recovered from a heavily redacted file, explicitly stated that the project had triggered an unforeseen geophysical hazard, lie designed to mask the real fear. Captain Thorne, a man dedicated to naval duty, began the slow turn toward the Alaskan coastline, but the Anomaly had already detected them. The final log entries, contained on the salvaged copper cylinder, detail the events of the last evening. The night was perfectly clear, the ocean surface flat and silvered by the three-quarter moon. There was no wind, no distant fog, yet the hydrophone registered an increasing power in the non-natural pulse. Ensign Hayes noted the faint static on the recording line was replaced by a high, penetrating whine, a sound that seemed to bypass the ears and vibrate directly within the bones. Thorne wrote of a profound sense of surveillance, a cold and analytical focus directed entirely at the Vanguard. He wrote, "We are being examined, not as a ship, but as an intrusion." At 2:47 hours, the recording cuts off violently. The last entry on the wax cylinder is a distorted, deep-ocean sound that Dr. Finch's later analysis suggested was the rapid, catastrophic pressurization of the hull, as if an immense, instantaneous wave of localized pressure had gripped the ship from below. The next log entry is simply silence. The Vanguard sank in minutes, leaving no survivors and only minimal debris, not the usual spread of wreckage expected from a structural failure, but a localized area of total implosion. The official inquiry was a quick, brutal affair. The ONI stepped in immediately, classifying the entire K-47 file as a matter of national security and ordering the total destruction of all project records. The narrative was simple and brutally enforced. The Vanguard sank due to an outdated hull design failure in a patch of bad weather. The truth was erased. The only reason we know the hidden truth is because of Chief Petty Officer Marcus Dale, the engineering officer who had built the copper cylinder. Knowing the Vanguard was doomed, he sealed the last acoustic wax cylinder and the last 2 pages of Thorne's journal inside the cylinder, weighted it heavily, and deployed it with a small, custom-made homing beacon designed to sync and transmit a faint signal for years until it could be recovered by specialized salvage equipment. This act of quiet defiance ensured that one file survived the institutional purge. The copper cylinder was recovered in 1928, 21 years later, by a commercial deep-sea trawler far north of the original coordinates. The Navy, still operating under the classified ONI protocol, immediately seized the artifact. The contents were placed in a vault and stamped with a K-47 designation. The official recovery file was a deliberately misleading document describing the contents as geological survey instruments. The process of was delayed for decades because the cipher used to protect Thorne's final journal entries was bespoke, designed by him using a combination of nautical codes and ancient Latin phrases. It was an ingenious analog form of encrypted security. When the texts were finally translated in the 1950s, the chilling final sentences of Thorne's log provided the key. The pulse is a heartbeat. It recognizes our intrusion. We are now beneath its awareness. The ONI, realizing the political danger of the contents, ordered a second, more thorough purge. They destroyed the original wax cylinder, claiming it was too degraded to be analyzed. But the Navy's own analysts, driven by intellectual curiosity, had made high-fidelity copies of the acoustic data onto early magnetic tape before the destruction order was carried out. These tapes, labeled vaguely as Pacific Seismic Data, 1907, became the shadow archive of Project K-47. The journey through the archival labyrinth brings us to a small, isolated room within the Navy's historical division, a room that feels unnervingly cold and sterile, a place where information goes not to be studied, but to be forgotten. Here we encounter the true anomaly of Project K-47's destruction, the meticulous and complete purging of the personnel. Records. The team of the USS Vanguard was not simply listed as lost at sea. Their entire past, their service records, their qualifications, even their family correspondence, stored in Navy files, was systematically wiped. They became statistical ghosts. This quiet dread, this administrative vanishing, suggests a cover-up far deeper than protecting against a foreign enemy. It suggests the information itself was deemed too dangerous for the fabric of American society. The government did not want future scientists to even know who to ask about the deep-sea pulse. The erasure was total, complete, and cold and analytical in its execution. We examined the surviving magnetic tape copy of the acoustic data. When played through modern, sensitive equipment, the sound is mesmerizing. It is not harsh. It is a deep, profound hum that resonates with the low-frequency tones often used in sleep therapy. Yet beneath the calm is an unmistakable, patterned beat. It is a slow, steady, powerful cadence, like the beat of a vast, submerged mechanical heart. This sound forms the core of the hidden truth. The analysis conducted by Navy researchers in the 1960s, which itself was immediately classified, drew unsettling conclusions. They determined that the sheer energetic output required to generate a sonic pulse of that frequency and intensity, sustained over such a wide oceanic area, was beyond the capabilities of any nation in 1907, and arguably beyond the capabilities of even 1960s technology. The power source had to be colossal, perhaps harnessing geological forces directly. The analysts, driven by intellectual curiosity, began using the term architectural sonar. The pulse, they theorized, was not a communication attempt, but a form of active mapping. A vast, non-biological intelligence was using sound to create a high-resolution, three-dimensional chart of the ocean floor, and the Vanguard had sailed directly into its active sweep zone. The last, sudden pressure wave recorded on the wax cylinder was not an attack, but potentially an aggressive, localized sonar ping, powerful enough to crush the thin hull of a pre-WWI vessel. A silent, analytical correction to an intrusion. The faint static that Ensign Hayes reported just before the end was the sound of the Vanguard's early electrical systems being overwhelmed by the immense energy of the deep-sea sound. It was the ship's own technology screaming in the presence of something far more advanced. The only classification of geophysical hazard simulation was a genius stroke of deception. It acknowledged the existence of the acoustic readings, but dismissed them as merely theoretical models for disaster planning. This way, the file was preserved but rendered inert, stripped of its context and its terrifying implication. The truth was buried not under cement, but under bureaucratic jargon. One of the few surviving documents is a hand-drawn chart, heavily water-stained, retrieved from the personal effects of Dr. Finch. It is a map of the trench area, but instead of the usual depth lines, it is filled with intricate geometric patterns. At the center where the Vanguard sank, Dr. Finch had sketched a repeating, almost floral design, surrounded by a single, stark word written in his cold and analytical hand: Natura absconditu, hidden nature. This single item is the last vestige of the scientist's intellectual curiosity, preserved against the massive state attempt to erase the incident entirely. The atmospheric build now leads us to the modern era. For decades, the story of Project K-47 became a ghost ship legend, whispered in the mess halls of the US Navy but officially denied. The files remained classified, sealed within lead-lined cabinets. But the ocean, vast and indifferent, does not keep secrets as well as the government. In the year 2003, a civilian deep ocean research institute, operating off the coast of Japan, undertook an unrelated seismic mapping project in the very same North Pacific region. They were using state-of-the-art towed arrays and sophisticated digital acoustic processing. Their primary objective was measuring tectonic creep. What they discovered was accidental and chilling. The Modern Acoustic Survey 2003 detected a series of intermittent, low-frequency, rhythmic pulses emanating from the deep trenches. They were not continuous like the 1907 anomaly, but they were mathematically identical in frequency and structure. The pattern of one cycle every 4.3 seconds had returned. The civilian team, driven by their own intellectual curiosity, labeled the sound the echo source. They could not identify its origin, but they knew it was non-biological, immense, and had been operating intermittently for at least a century. When they submitted their findings to the National Science Foundation, the report was immediately intercepted by a joint naval intelligence task force. The ONI's response was a chilling reflection of the original 1907 cover-up. The civilian data was seized, the scientists were subjected to extensive non-disclosure agreements, and the official report was altered to attribute the acoustic signature to deep-sea methane hydrate venting. The government executed a digital erasure of the original raw data from the civilian servers, reinforcing the total control over the hidden truth. The key to the modern paranoia is the direct coincident readings. The fact that a non-biological sound pattern, discovered and concealed in 1907, reappeared in 2003, proves two things. First, the anomaly is still active, and second, it operates on a timeline completely outside of human history. The silent cartographer is still mapping. The analysts who worked on the 2003 data felt a profound quiet dread. They realized the sound wasn't just mapping the ocean, it was persistent. If it was a technology, it was effectively immortal. If it was a life form, its longevity defied carbon dating. They were like Captain Thorne a century before them, witnessing a deep-sea anomaly that represented a fundamental challenge to human understanding of the planet. The persistence of this deep-sea rhythm forms the retention bridge, the hook that refuses to let the mind settle. We reflect now on the purpose of the encrypted copper cylinder itself. Why did Chief Petty Officer Dale choose copper, and why was the casing so elaborate? His design was a small act of engineering genius, intended to withstand decades of crushing hydrostatic pressure, a testament to his intellectual curiosity and his desire to preserve the file against the inevitability of the Oni purge. The final element of the surviving evidence is the analysis of the Vanguard's last known trajectory. The ship was not heading randomly, it was sailing away from the source of the anomaly, but it was doing so in a straight line, as if its course had been rigidly dictated. The final moments of the Vanguard were not a chaotic disaster, but a cold and analytical termination, the ultimate psychological thriller. Element of this hidden truth is the realization that the silent cartographer is not hostile in the human sense. It is merely dominant. Its mapping process is so powerful that any intrusion, such as a thin-hulled steamship, is dealt with as a simple pressure correction, a minor hydrostatic adjustment necessary to continue the work. The Vanguard was less an enemy and more an imperfection to be smoothed out. This idea that human endeavor can be so trivially and calmly erased by an immense, unseen force is what gives the archive its chilling power. We return to the quiet hum of the archive's cooling system, a modern sound that overlays the century-old whisper of the wax cylinder. The archive itself is a metaphor for the story, a steel and concrete attempt to contain a secret that originated in the infinite, moving water. The cold air around the antique documents is not just temperature control, it is the lingering presence of the abyss. The classified nature of Project K-47 was never about preventing another country from finding the anomaly. It was about preventing the American public from understanding that beneath the waves, there is a mechanism of power and observation that renders all geopolitical struggles insignificant. The erased personnel records confirm this. The human cost was incidental to the necessity of containment. The story ends not with a bang, but with a sound. It is the rhythmic, slow, deep-frequency hum of the deep ocean pulse. It is the sound of something working, something mapping, something waiting. It is the sound of the deep. Indifferent to the surface world, we leave the file in the archive, sealed and labeled, knowing that its contents, the encrypted logs and the non-natural acoustic signature, represent the true, unacknowledged history of the Pacific. The anomaly remains active in the deepest trenches, still cycling, still mapping. The scientists who heard the original pulse in 1907 referred to the immense rhythmic sound as the source, but the true question is not what the source is, but what it is charting. What is it preparing for? In the next chapter of the Archive Chill, we will examine the case of the 1950s Soviet nuclear subcrew who began hearing the very same rhythmic pulse on their sonar, leading to the creation of the Brezhnev Protocol. The official records, encrypted and heavily redacted, described the loss of the USS Vanguard on a clear night in 1907 as an unforeseen structural failure. This is the classified narrative enforced by the Office of Naval Intelligence. The hidden truth is contained in a single, surviving entry on a brittle, salt-stained log sheet, the last message before the ship was utterly destroyed. It suggests the Vanguard was annihilated not by a storm, but by a sudden, localized force acting with impossible precision. What happened that night was the first verifiable human encounter with an oceanic anomaly of vast, acoustic presence emanating from the Pacific trenches. Every sailor, every log, and every primary file related to Project K-47 was systematically erased to prevent knowledge of this encounter from reaching the public. The ship disappeared without sending a distress signal, yet its final garbled message hints at a pressure spike equivalent to 5 times its operational limit. The file was stamped "Never open." Yet we begin tonight ... by settling into the stillness of the archival facility, a place built entirely of steel architecture and controlled climate. The only sound is the gentle, quiet hum of the filtration system, cycling the air above the century-old documents. We are reviewing a fragile copy of the Court of Inquiry transcript pages, so brittle they crumble slightly at the edges. The ink has faded with secrets, leaving behind only the cold, sterile language of a cover-up. The air in this room is deliberately dry and cool, a cold air that seems to carry the chill of the North Pacific. We seek to reconstruct the final hours of the Vanguard, the moment when intellectual curiosity turned into quiet dread, using only the fragments the government failed to destroy. The USS Vanguard was a ship of quiet contradictions, a product of early industrial might, tasked with investigating phenomena far beyond human engineering. On the evening of October 23, 1907, the ship was situated over the deepest part of its designated survey zone, an area where the seafloor plunged abruptly into a depth not yet officially charted. The atmosphere aboard was one of intense, focused intellectual curiosity, mixed with the exhaustion of 5 months at sea. Captain Silas Thorne had already recorded the repetitive, low-frequency pulse the anomaly for 3 days. He was a man of logic, but his logs reveal a growing, quiet dread. He wrote that the ocean, usually a chaotic natural entity, felt unnervingly ordered. The absence of familiar sounds was as terrifying as the rhythmic sound they were recording. The faint static that had previously plagued the analog hydrophones had vanished completely, replaced by an unnerving clarity. When the primary sound pulse was active, the shift change at 22 o'clock hours was routine. The sky was cloudless, dominated by a large gibbous moon that cast a silvery sheen across a sea so calm it resembled polished glass. The second officer, Lieutenant Commander Hayes, noted the perfect visibility and the complete lack of swell conditions that defied any rational explanation for a later disaster. The ship was moving slowly, maintaining station for the final deep deployment of the new pressure-amplifying hydrophone, a massive piece of brass and rubber lowered on a mile of steel cable. The final, preserved log sheet, the one that became the classified focus of the ONI inquiry, was maintained by engineer John Dale, the brother of the chief petty officer who saved the copper cylinder. Dale's entry at 23:15 is starkly cold and analytical. Deep hydrophone pH-2 deployment successful. Pressure reading nominal for 5,000 fathoms. Ambient temperature registered 37.8 degrees Fahrenheit. Acoustic signature, designated K-pulse, remained stable, 4.3 seconds per cycle. However, minutes later, a dramatic change began. At 23:40, the analog pressure gauge in the instrument room, a magnificent, finely calibrated dial, began to climb erratic. It was not a steady, geological pressure increase, but a series of short, sharp, terrifying spikes. The needle jumped, stabilized briefly, and then surged again. The readings indicated that the ship was suddenly experiencing immense, localized stress on its lower hull stress that should only occur in the most violent tempest. Yet, above deck, the air was still, and the moon was bright. The sudden stress caused the lights below deck to flicker violently, a terrifying monitor flicker in the small instrument room. The team, driven by quiet dread, scrambled to haul in the sensitive hydrophone, fearing the cable would snap. Captain Thorne arrived on the bridge seconds later. His last recorded act, written in his own hand on the margin of the navigation log, notes the silence of the crew and the chilling beauty of the night. He immediately understood that the danger was not coming from the surface, or the atmosphere, but from below, from the source of the persistent acoustic hum. The acoustic data, later recovered from the salvaged copper cylinder, reveals what happened next. The K-pulse, the rhythmic mapping sound, stopped. For 10 seconds, there was absolute, perfect silence on the recording. This sudden absence was more alarming than the previous presence. It was the sound of the anomaly focusing. Then, at precisely 23:55, the hydrophone registered an acoustic event of impossible magnitude. It wasn't a pulse. It was a single, immense, low-frequency wave sound calculated to have carried the energy of a small seismic event. This wave was not diffused. It was entirely focused on the Vanguard's position. The analysis later suggested this wave was not an active weapon, but a sudden, massive correction to the pressure field around the intrusion. The immediate result was catastrophic. The pressure wave created a force that shattered the Vanguard's hull plating almost instantaneously, twisting the supporting internal steel architecture like soft wire. The ship did not sink slowly. It was crushed and folded inward, imploding under the weight of an instantaneous, external pressure application. The destruction was so rapid that no steam could be vented, no bells could be rung, and no radio distress signal could be transmitted. The ship went from fully operational to a compressed wreck in less than 60 seconds. The water rushing in created a final, violent expulsion of air and steam that briefly disturbed the calm surface, leaving behind only minimal floating debris enough to confirm a sinking, but not enough to explain the how. The ocean quickly returned to its mirrored calm. The aftermath of the sinking became the true genesis of the classified cover-up. Within 48 hours, the USS Portland, a cruiser dispatched to the area, found the debris field. The recovery team, driven by their initial intellectual curiosity regarding the nature of the disaster, found the evidence utterly confusing. Hull plates showed signs of inward buckling and compression, not outward tearing expected from a boiler explosion, which was the Navy's first assumption. Admiral Yu, head of the newly formed Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI, personally intercepted the Portland's initial report. He understood immediately that the true narrative, a technologically advanced, unseen force destroying a naval asset with surgical precision on a clear night, was too destabilizing for the pre-war political climate. He immediately invoked Protocol 7 Beta. Protocol 2 Beta was the official means by which the entire story of the anomaly was systematically erased. Admiral Yule ordered the purging of the personnel records, not just listing the crew as lost, but wiping their existence from the Navy's active service file. They were scrubbed from rosters, decommissioned post-mortem, and their families were given a heavily encrypted pension agreement, citing only unforeseen natural disaster. The goal was to remove any human link that could lead future researchers back to Project K-47. The wreckage itself was declared too deep for recovery. This was another strategically inserted hidden truth. While deep-sea recovery was challenging in 1907, the true reason for the abandonment was to ensure that the compressed, unnaturally damaged hull could never be analyzed by civilian engineers. The wreck became an underwater tomb, sealed by state secret. The single most dangerous file, the copper cylinder containing the last acoustic data and Captain Thorne's final, desperate entries, was recovered years later. When the ONI took possession, the information it held became the subject of intense, internal, quiet dread. The log clearly detailed the cessation of the pulse, followed by the catastrophic pressure spike. It showed the Vanguard was targeted. The ONI analysts, in a moment of unsettling reflection, realized they could not deny the physics recorded on the cylinder. Instead, they performed a bureaucratic erasure. They commissioned a full study arguing that the ship had somehow entered a unique, deep-sea pocket of highly pressurized methane gas which, when rapidly released, could theoretically generate the acoustic and pressure readings recorded. This lie, which was included in the final, classified Court of Inquiry report, served to pin the blame on an improbable, yet natural phenomenon. The cold and analytical manipulation of the facts was complete. The original acoustic data, the true heart of the anomaly, was copied onto photographic plates, an early form of data backup before the wax cylinder was officially destroyed. These plates, labeled Pacific Geophysical Hazard Plate 4, became the ghost archive. They show the spike of energy on that final, clear night, a clean, perfect line of immense power that ends abruptly in silence. This line is the signature of the unseen, CARTOGRAPHER. The survivors of the greater Project K-47, the administrative staff, the logistical personnel were all assigned to remote stations and ordered never to speak of the Vanguard. The psychological thriller aspect here is the enforcement of silence. These individuals carried the quiet dread of knowing that an entire naval vessel and its crew were calmly and instantly destroyed by something the world was not allowed to acknowledge. They were forced to live with the knowledge of the hidden truth. But the planet was not entirely human territory. The atmospheric transition into the long-term impact of this event is crucial. The sinking of the Vanguard cemented the ONI's approach to dealing with high strangeness, total, aggressive denial. The principle was established: a controllable lie is safer than an uncontrollable truth. The enduring paradox is that the Vanguard provided the first and most direct proof of the anomaly, yet its destruction simultaneously provided the government with the perfect pretext for secrecy. The clear sky mystery remains the most compelling file because the absence of natural disaster is the strongest evidence of an unnatural one. The physical sensation of the Archivo persistent, regulated cold air mimics the feeling of the deep ocean where the truth of the Vanguard lies. This story of disappearance is also a story of a foundation. The sinking didn't end the Navy's research. It merely drove it deeper underground, transforming intellectual curiosity into weaponized obsession. The lessons learned from the Vanguard's fate were used to develop protocols for sound suppression and deep diving capabilities, all predicated on the silent knowledge that something had to be avoided in the deep trenches. We examined the engineering reports that followed 1907. There is a sudden, unexplained jump in naval design toward heavily reinforced, pressure-resistant hulls, far exceeding the demands of contemporary conventional warfare. These ships, though built for war, were structurally designed to survive the kind of pressure spike that destroyed the Vanguard. This is the shadow history, the unwritten truth, embedded in the blueprints. The most profound element of the quiet dread lies in Captain Thorne's final reflection, recovered from his journal fragments. He theorized that the acoustic pattern was the sound of a system maintenance cycle, an automated process. He wrote that the Vanguard had simply been caught in the sweep of a cleaning mechanism, an incidental piece of dust removed by an immeasurably large, automated sensor array. This realization that human life was irrelevant to the process was his final, terrifying intellectual curiosity. The mystery of the clear sky is also the mystery of the perfect stillness. For the sonic anomaly to have had such a concentrated effect, the water column above the Vanguard had to be absolutely placid. A turbulent ocean would have dispersed the energy. The deep-sea entity was operating in a zone of perfect, preternatural, silent, calculated trap. The cold and analytical destruction of the ship was successful because the ONI understood that people look for human error or natural violence. The lack of either, they realized, would strain credulity more than a lie about a rogue storm. By creating a classified file about a geophysical event, they ensured that the truth that the ship was erased by a superior intellect was permanently filed under the category of impossible. The faint static that characterized the Vanguard's early hydrophone recordings was likely the ambient noise of human technology interfering with the pure, deep-sea signal. When the great pulse ceased, the interference vanished, and the anomaly was able to perform its action in pure, acoustic silence. The silence itself became the weapon. We look at the faded image of the Vanguard on the archival file. A proud ship reduced to legend. The hidden truth is now part of the deep ocean's geometry. The ship is still down there, a perfectly preserved monument to the moment humanity learned it was not alone in mapping the planet. The clear sky sinking of the Vanguard taught the US Navy how to conceal the unknown, but the acoustic anomaly continued its work, quietly mapping the deep. In the next chapter, we move forward to the 1960s, where we discover the chilling, encrypted transmissions intercepted by a Soviet deep submergence vehicle, leading to the creation of the Brezhnev Protocol, a plan specifically designed to communicate with the silent CARTOGRAPHERS. The disappearance of the USS Vanguard in 1907 was declared a total loss, every file and log erased in a panic of pre-war secrecy. This was the classified conclusion, but beneath the institutional whitewash, a single act of defiance ensured the hidden truth survived. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Dale, in the final minutes before the ship was crushed, sealed the ultimate secret in a specially designed high-pressure copper cylinder. This small, torpedo-shaped object became a time capsule recovered 21 years later, bearing the only eyewitness account of the deep-sea anomaly. Inside, nestled within layers of oilcloth and lead sheeting, were acoustic spectrograms and Captain Thorne's final journal entries, all protected by a bespoke, encrypted cipher. The cylinder itself is a paradox, a delicate brass and copper artifact that defied the immense, crushing pressure of the Pacific abyss. Its contents proved the Vanguard was not destroyed by nature, but by an unseen, intelligent force that had been silently mapping the sea floor. The file was stamped, "Never open, yet we begin tonight, ... By focusing on the object itself. The copper cylinder rests on a velvet cushion within a temperature-controlled vault. The only sound is the constant, quiet hum of the dehumidifier, a protective mechanism against the natural entropy that seeks to claim all secrets. The copper casing, now oxidized and darkened to a deep, earthy brown, is cold to the touch, still bearing the faint scoring marks left by its long, silent descent through the water column. This single artifact is the physical manifestation of quiet dread, final scream encased in metal. The material, copper, a natural absorber of magnetic energy, hints at the intentionality behind its design. This is not just a container, it is a meticulously engineered time capsule, a file that was always intended to survive the initial erasure. The very existence of the copper cylinder undermines the entire official narrative of the Vanguard's sinking. Its construction was an exercise in pure intellectual curiosity and engineering foresight by Chief Petty Officer Marcus Dale. Dale was a highly skilled, self-taught engineer who understood the brutal, unforgiving nature of the deep ocean. He knew that any conventional wooden box or steel canister would be instantly flattened at the depths where the Vanguard was operating. His design was a marvel of pre-WWI ingenuity. The cylinder was double-walled, made of thick, oxygen-free copper and fitted with a screw cap sealed with vulcanized rubber and advanced material for the time. He utilized the principle of hydrostatic equilibrium, weighting the cylinder internally so that it would sink rapidly but remain perfectly balanced as the pressure increased, distributing the force evenly across its surface. This meticulous attention to detail transformed the cylinder from a simple container into an archival fortress. Dale deployed the cylinder minutes before the pressure wave struck. His final act was an emotional one, a reflection of his own quiet dread. Regarding the purpose of Project K-47, he didn't trust the Navy's handling of the Anomaly. He believed the hidden truth deserved to outlive the secrecy and the lies. Inside the capsule were two primary documents, both considered the most dangerous classified materials of the early 20th century: a single, thin wax cylinder containing the last acoustic recording, and the final pages of Captain Thorne's journal, scrawled hastily in pencil. The wax cylinder, though fragile, was the ultimate prize. Wax, being a relatively inert material, preserved the sound data astonishingly well against the corrosive effects of the salt water. When it was finally recovered and analyzed decades later, the initial sound was that low, rhythmic hum, the pulse, cycling every 4.3 seconds. The analysts, driven by intellectual curiosity, were able to track the sound's decay, confirming its immense power. The recording ends with a distinct, sharp sonic spike, the final, destructive pressure wave that annihilated the ship. The data provided the incontrovertible proof that the Vanguard was not damaged by a fault, but by a precise, overwhelming sonic force. Captain Thorne's final journal entries offered the psychological component. He used a personal cipher, an encrypted code based on obscure Latin ship commands and classical mythology, designed to be illegible to anyone outside his immediate circle of highly educated officers. This personal encryption, which took the ONI analysts years to break, was the last line of defense against the bureaucratic erasure. The tone of Thorne's last words is one of resignation and profound reflection. He did not write of panic, but of a cold and analytical realization. He recognized the acoustic signature as a pattern of intelligent behavior. He wrote, "We are being corrected. The process demands stillness. Our presence is interference." His final sentence, the one that triggered the highest level of classified response when finally translated, was simply, "They seek the origin." When the cylinder was recovered by a fishing trawler off the coast of Alaska in 1928, the discovery was immediately suppressed. The initial report filed by the trawler's captain was intercepted by the ONI, and within 24 hours, the captain and his crew were subjected to heavy non-disclosure agreements and given an unprecedented cash settlement. The cylinder was rushed to Washington and placed directly in Admiral Ewell's vault. The official log describing the recovery was a deliberately false narrative, citing the discovery of geological samples and obsolete survey equipment. The moment the ONI acquired the cylinder, they faced an insurmountable problem. They could not destroy it immediately, as its recovery had been logged externally. They had to neutralize its information without physically erasing the artifact itself. Their solution was ingenious and entirely bureaucratic. They classified the encryption key. They assigned the journal translations to a small, isolated team of linguists who were told they were working on WWI German naval codes. This kept the context of the anomaly fragmented and meaningless. The copper cylinder became an active secret, visible, but rendered useless by lack of context. It was stored in a humidity-controlled cabinet, a constant, physical reminder of the hidden truth the Navy was desperate to contain. The material of the cylinder itself was later studied by ONI, driven by their own intellectual curiosity about how the copper had resisted such immense pressure. Their classified findings suggested that the copper had absorbed and dispersed the shockwave rather than reflecting it, a property they theorized Dale had intentionally leveraged. The cylinder was more than a container, it was an acoustic shock absorber. This cold and analytical report was immediately filed away, never to inform future ship design, as that would confirm the existence of the force that necessitated the design. The faint static we hear on the recovered archival tape, taken from a copy of the wax cylinder, is not just noise, it is the lingering acoustic footprint of the Vanguard's brief, terrifying encounter. The sound is the true essence of the time capsule, preserved against the decades. The recovery of the cylinder introduced a new layer of quiet dread. Within the ONI, the object was physical proof that the crew of the Vanguard understood their fate and deliberately tried to transmit the Anomaly's existence to the future. This required the ONI to launch a second, more thorough, and entirely illegal erasure of all records related to Chief Petty Officer Dale, ensuring his ingenuity and defiance were utterly forgotten. For decades, the copper cylinder remained locked away, its secrets preserved in an archaic form. It was a perfect piece of archival irony. The most important piece of evidence was the one that required the most effort to access, ensuring that only those with access to the highest levels of classified decryption resources could ever know the truth. The cylinder was a constant file that, every time it was touched, reinforced the institutional commitment to the cover-up. The translation of Captain Thorne's final, encrypted log was a slow, agonizing process spanning the 1930s and 1940s. The linguists, working in isolation, slowly revealed the terrifying nature of the anomaly. Thorne's entries included detailed mathematical observations regarding the capulls, noting that the sound waves contained complex, non-repeating data packets that seemed to be charting geological shifts at the core level. He concluded that the Silent Cartographers were not interested in the water or the surface, but in the structural integrity of the planet itself. This intellectual curiosity among the decryption team caused problems for the ONI. They began asking questions that veered too close to the hidden truth. The solution was a final, devastating act of administrative control. The linguists were suddenly reassigned to different war efforts, their notes seized, and the completed translations were filed under the innocuous title, Obsolete Nautical Cryptography. The file was once again rendered inert, buried under layers of official neglect. The cold air of the vault acts as a constant reminder of the environment. The cylinder survived. It spent 21 years in crushing pressure and near-freezing temperatures, protecting its fragile cargo. This incredible feat of survival is the true paradox of the story. The anomaly that destroyed the ship inadvertently proved the genius of the man who sought to defy it. The analysis of the cylinder's exterior provided another piece of disturbing reflection. Microscopic examination showed minute, non-corrosive etching marks on the copper surface, marks that did not align with natural wear or geological interaction. Some analysts in the 1980s hypothesized that these markings were left by the pressure wave itself, a kind of physical signature that confirmed the highly precise, localized nature of the ship's destruction. The anomaly had not just crushed the ship, it had left a calling card on the only object that survived. The steel architecture of the vault is built to withstand direct attack, but it is ultimately protecting a small, fragile, copper cylinder, a recognition that the greatest danger to the state is not external force, but the knowledge contained within that one, tiny, surviving artifact. The vault and the cylinder exist in a permanent state of mutual, quiet dread. The final analysis of the cylinder, performed in 1995, confirmed that the object contained trace levels of a deeply compressed, non-atmospheric gas, a faint, inert residue of the immediate, violent implosion. This provided the final, cold and analytical piece of evidence. The atmosphere surrounding the Vanguard instantly vanished, replaced by an overwhelming contained vacuum created by the pressure spike. The crew didn't drown. They were annihilated by localized physics. The copper cylinder is, therefore, a message written in 3 languages: the language of sound, the language of encryption, and the language of catastrophic physics. It speaks of a reality far more vast and terrifying than the government narrative of structural failure. The ongoing preservation of this artifact is an act of continuing historical guilt and quiet dread. Every time the curator or an authorized analyst must handle the cylinder, They are confronted with the undeniable proof of the anomaly and the magnitude of the official erasure. It is a heavy object, both literally and psychologically. Its weight symbolizes the collective burden of the classified secret. The cylinder's resilience highlights the failure of the ONI's initial purge. They destroyed the human element and the surface logs. But they did not account for the sheer, tenacious ingenuity of Chief Petty Officer Dale, whose intellectual curiosity forced the truth into survival. The monitor flicker on the archival screens today is a faint echo of the final moments of the Vanguard's electrical system. Overwhelmed by the power that Dale sought to document, the cylinder, this tiny, unassuming piece of copper, is the most powerful file in the Navy archives because it is the only object whose contents were explicitly intended to subvert the government's narrative. It is the counter-narrative, physical proof that the men of the Vanguard died with a conscious understanding of the terrifying truth. We allow ourselves one final moment of reflection on the artifact. It is small enough to fit in the palm of a hand, yet it holds a truth large enough to reshape global geopolitics. It survived decades of crushing pressure and the relentless attempts of the US government to erase it. The cylinder is the ghost of Project K-47, an inert sentinel guarding the most profound secret of the 20th century. The encrypted nature of Thorne's last words, even after decryption continues to challenge our understanding. His note, they seek the origin. Origin of what? Of the geological forces, of the planet. The cylinder does not answer that question, but its continued existence ensures the question remains open. It forces the viewer to confront it's a possibility that the hidden truth of the ocean floor is far more ancient and far more active than we dare to imagine. The copper cylinder survived the destruction and the subsequent erasure, carrying the cables into the modern era. But what happened when that ancient sound, cycling every 4.3 seconds, was intercepted by the advanced sonar arrays of a nuclear power? In the next chapter, we will follow the second life of the copper cylinder's contents, as the US Navy finds its data has been classified by the Soviet Union, leading directly to the chilling creation of the Brezhnev Protocol. The destruction of the USS Vanguard was not the end of the secret. It was the start of an encrypted message, deliberately timed to survive the catastrophe. The single copper cylinder recovered years later contained 2 layers of classified information. The first was a complex, self-designed cipher encoding Captain Thorne's final journal entries. The second, the true anomaly, was an acoustic recording of the deep-sea pulse itself, a sound that proved to be a secret algorithm. Analysis of the sound wave revealed it was not noise, but mathematically structured data, a form of architectural sonar used by an unseen intelligence to chart the planet's core. The US Navy spent decades trying to deny the existence of this hidden truth, while simultaneously attempting to decode the algorithm. The original wax cylinder data was systematically erased from public view, forcing analysts to rely on fragile copies of a file that proved the existence of a non-human cartographer. The file was stamped "Never open," yet we begin tonight by focusing on the duality of the encrypted message, the language of man and the language of sound. In the quiet dread of the archival room, we hear the gentle hum of the magnetic tape spinning, a modern machine struggling to interpret 1907 data. The light in the decoding laboratory is low, casting long shadows across the screens displaying the raw sonic spectrum. The cold air is constant, necessary to preserve the fragile magnetic oxides. The visual is stark. On one screen, archaic Latin script, the encrypted journal. On the other, a precise, rhythmic waveform. The connection between the two forms the core of the hidden truth. The captain wrote what he saw. The ocean recorded what happened. The complexity of the recovered information was the ONI's greatest challenge and its most profound source of quiet dread. They didn't just have an acoustic mystery, they had a linguistic one. Captain Thorne, realizing the state would erase all conventional records, had designed a tutored security system to ensure his intellectual curiosity survived. First, the physical security, the copper cylinder, built by Chief Petty Officer Dale, designed to defeat hydrostatic pressure. Second, the information security. Thorne's final journal was written in a unique, layered cipher. It wasn't a standard Navy code like Visionaire. It was a blend of classicist knowledge and nautical structure. The key to the first layer was the numerical values assigned to the constellation figures of the night the ship sank. The key to the second layer was the Latin abbreviations used for obscure knots and rigging commands. The initial decryption attempts in the 1930s were failures, largely because the ONI analysts were looking for military intelligence, not philosophical observation. They expected grid coordinates or battle plans. The truth, protected by this highly personalized encryption, was far more unsettling. The linguists, working in isolation, felt a growing sense of quiet dread as they realized the author was documenting an existential encounter, not a naval disaster. When the code finally yielded in the early 1940s, the content shocked the Oni. Thorne's last pages were not a distress call but a cold, an analytical report on the function of the anomaly. He detailed his realization that the pulse cycling every 4.3 seconds was an act of non-human communication. He wrote of the pulse, "It is not a signal, but a sweep. It measures density, composition, and distance, using a non-Euclidean methodology. We are an obstruction in a geocentric calculation." This journal entry, now a classified file labeled K47, Eliterans Dois, became the intellectual core of the cover-up. It was proof that the Vanguard's crew understood the true nature of the force that destroyed them. The Oni immediately realized they couldn't simply dismiss the sinking as a mistake. They had to erase the context of the captain's genius. The decryption team was dissolved, and the translation was locked in a vault. Separated from the original cylinder, the second part of the encrypted message was the sonic anomaly itself, the acoustic algorithm. This was the most terrifying piece of evidence because it contained structure without purpose that humanity could understand. The early 1960s, driven by Cold War intellectual curiosity and Soviet underwater surveillance, saw the first serious cold and analytical attempt to decode the sound. Navy, using early transistorized computers, transformed the analog wax cylinder data into a digital What they saw was not a random wave pattern, but a series of distinct, geometrically precise data packets contained within the low-frequency hum. The wave was organized into complex prime number sequences and structured harmonic ratios that defied random generation. This led to the conclusion that the Carpulse was a secret algorithm of sound. The complexity was overwhelming. The frequency remained absolutely stable for 0.3 seconds, but the internal structure of the sound wave changed subtly with the changing geological pressures of the trench. The analysts realized the sound was interacting with the planet itself, taking an immense low-frequency resonance and modulating it to reflect geological data. The faint static that had originally obscured the sound was, in fact, the interference created by the Vanguard's own engine, noise trying to mask the clarity of the anomaly signal. The chief acoustic, Dr. Alan Reed, presented a classified paper in 1965 concluding that the Carpulse was the sonic equivalent of a geological X-ray, a method of deep earth sounding that was orders of magnitude more sophisticated than anything the US military possessed. He labeled the pattern the Cartesian echo, after its perfect, logical structure. His key finding was that the algorithm wasn't transmitting data out. It was broadcasting a fixed signal and measuring the planetary response. This intellectual curiosity was met with immediate quiet dread by the Pentagon. If the source of the Carpulse was mapping the deeper strata of the Earth, it could predict seismic events, volcano activity, and, most alarmingly, the failure points of the seabed itself, including the locations of deep-sea cables and submerged military assets. The algorithm was a map to the planet's vulnerabilities. The security classification jumped again. The Carpulse analysis file was moved from the ONI to a special, sealed department within the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA. The decision was made to use the hidden truth, the algorithm, as an intelligence asset, rather than expose the source. The US military began dedicating massive resources to trying to predict the Carpulse's activation times, attempting to piggyback on the anomaly's charting abilities. The great irony of the encrypted message is that the Navy had to break the cipher only to learn that the information contained was too dangerous to use openly. The cold air of the decryption room seemed to solidify the quiet dread. The threat wasn't the sound, but the pure, unachievable knowledge the sound provided. The most unsettling discovery regarding the Carpulse algorithm came when analysts realized its structured nature was self-correcting. Over the decades, small, minute changes in the structure of the sound wave were recorded. These changes, initially attributed to recording error, were later understood to be the anomaly compensating for continental drift and minor seismic shifts. The algorithm was active, alive, and constantly refining its planetary model. It was, in effect, a hyperstable geological operating system. Captain Thorne's journal, which provided the linguistic framework for the discovery, also contained the encrypted warning. He wrote of the fear that if humanity ever broadcast its own intentional signal into the deep, the response would be immediate and destructive. He called it the sign of noise. This passage became the justification for the total erasure of the cables from any public scientific record. The government was terrified of triggering a recurrence of the Vanguard's fate. The archival records show that in 1978, a high-level classified study was initiated to determine if the cupoles could be weaponized. The results were negative. The sheer power required to generate a sonic pulse of that magnitude, even for a military superpower, was deemed impossible. Furthermore, the cold and analytical conclusion was that trying to mimic the pulse would inevitably lead to the source, detecting the human intrusion, leading to unpredictable, and likely violent, counter-mapping. The faint static still present on the edges of the early recordings is now understood to be the acoustic bleed from the Vanguard's doomed early 20th century technology, a constant reminder of the fragility of human endeavor against the vastness of the Anomaly's power. Every time the tape is played, that fleeting static serves as a ghost signal. The decryption of Thorne's journal revealed the true ethical dilemma. His final advice, almost a plea, was to leave the deep alone, to accept the ocean as an unhuman space. His entries concluded, "If we map them, they will map us. The imbalance of technology ensures our loss. Let the silence be the boundary." This message, the hidden truth of the archive, was the moral framework the Navy chose to ignore in favor of secrecy and exploitation. The ONI's systematic erasure of the project records extended even to the physical components of the decryption process. The early transistorized computer used by Dr. Reed's team was stripped of its hard drives, and the machine itself was dismantled, its steel architecture disposed of as scrap metal. This deliberate destruction was designed to ensure that the decryption methodology, chain of intellectual curiosity that connected Thorne's Latin codes to Reed's sonic analysis, could never be recreated. The remaining evidence of the secret algorithm of sound exists in fragmented, highly classified sections: the photographic plates of the written translation of Thorne's journal, and the digital tape copies of the cupulse itself. No single file holds the entire truth. The intelligence agencies were so fearful of the algorithm's power that they deliberately fragmented the data to prevent any single analyst from gaining a complete picture of the anomaly. This is the ultimate act of quiet dread, fear of one's own knowledge. The atmospheric transition into the modern era shows the persistence of the message. Today, advanced acoustic arrays still register the cupulse intermittently, a low, powerful, structured hum beneath the noise of modern shipping and submarine traffic. The frequency is still 4.3 seconds. The stability of the algorithm over more than a century is itself the greatest testament to the power of the unseen. Cartographer. The ongoing intellectual curiosity regarding the cables focuses not on what the algorithm is, but why it began at all. Was the USS Vanguard truly the first interaction, or did the anomaly commence its mapping cycle long before 1907? Thorne's journal suggests the latter, hinting that the cupulse had been running for centuries, with the Vanguard's intrusion merely being the first. Detection by human technology. The legacy of the encrypted message is the birth of modern acoustic deception. The Navy's entire doctrine of submarine silence and acoustic masking, developed in the 1950s and 60s, was secretly influenced by need to hide military assets from the secret algorithm of sound. Every new sonar technique was first tested against the cable's signature. In a desperate, quiet dread of being corrected like the Vanguard, we look at the image of the deciphered journal entry, a message written in a beautiful, flowing hand, yet conveying total existential terror. It is the purest form of the hidden truth, a moment of clear, analytical understanding just before total destruction. The cold and analytical realization of one man, trapped in the copper cylinder, preserved against the tide of history. The final piece of archival reflection is the understanding that the cupulse represents the physical realization of the universe's ultimate encryption, a language of pure physics that requires a planet to communicate. We, as observers, are only picking up the echo of a vast geological conversation. The secret algorithm of sound was broken, fragmented, and classified by the American government, but the sound itself continued to broadcast, cycling every 4.3 seconds. What happened when this anomaly was first registered, not by a pre-WWI hydrophone, but by the ultra-sensitive sonar of a Soviet nuclear submarine deep beneath the Arctic ice? In the next chapter, we will uncover the chilling Soviet response to the cupulse, leading to the top-secret creation of the Brezhnev Protocol, a direct, high-powered attempt to communicate with the silent Cartographer. The ultimate proof of the deep sea. Anomaly, the silent cartographer, was captured not by modern sensors, but by a rudimentary 1907 brass bell, the Analog Hydrophone. This simple instrument, designed only to measure natural marine sounds, recorded a pattern so mathematically precise that its existence was immediately classified by the US Navy. The data, preserved on a fragile wax cylinder file, proved the existence of an immense, rhythmic, non-biological intelligence charting the Pacific trenches. The entire acoustic record of Project K-47 was subsequently erased from public history, its terrifying hidden truth sealed under layers of bureaucratic silence. We found the ghost of that recording in an encrypted magnetic copy decades later, revealing that the hydrophone had captured the exact, powerful pulse that instantly destroyed the USS Vanguard. It was the first time humanity had deliberately listened to the abyss, and the abyss had listened back. The file was stamped "Never open," yet we begin tonight. By stepping back into the quiet, hypnotic rhythm of the acoustic laboratory, where the first sounds of the anomaly were processed. The only sound in this part of the archive is the gentle, steady tick of a large, antique clock measuring not time, but the slow, analytical unfolding of history. We are surrounded by images of brass and steel, the heavy, unforgiving steel architecture of early naval equipment. The air is still, the cold air of precise temperature control, mirroring the chill of the deep water where the hydrophone once listened. We are focusing on a technical schematic, a diagram of the hydrophone, essentially a large pressure-resistant bell lowered deep into the water, its sole purpose to translate the immense pressures of the deep into a tiny vibration for the wax recorder. The Analog Hydrophone was the crown jewel of Project K-47, representing the peak of early 20th century acoustic technology. It was primitive by modern standards, no electrical amplification, no filters, relying entirely on the mechanical principle of sound conduction through water and metal. This simplicity, however, was its saving grace. The lack of electrical components meant it could withstand incredible pressure and record the true, raw audio of the abyssal zone, unfiltered by human interference. The design team, driven by intellectual curiosity, had engineered the hydrophone to listen for distant geological events, tectonic grinding, deep-sea volcanic activity, and the movement of massive whale pods. They were prepared for noise and chaos. They were entirely unprepared for the profound order they would encounter. The initial deployments of the hydrophone were tedious, requiring hours of slow cable unwinding and manual monitoring. The scientists worked in shifts, encased in the cold air of the instrument room, listening intently to the faint sounds transmitted up the massive oil-filled cable. For weeks, the recordings contained expected marine life and the occasional, distant rumble of seismic shift. The faint static of the hydrophone's own cable rubbing against the hull was a constant background presence, a reminder of the ship's limited technology. The atmosphere on the USS Vanguard shifted profoundly when they reached the target area, the deep trenches of the North Pacific. The hydrophone operator, Ensign David Hayes, recorded a sudden, unnerving absence of marine sound. Captain Thorne, documenting the event in his personal log, the very one later encrypted, noted, "The sea has gone silent. It is a vacuum of sound." This quiet dread was the first clue that they were entering a controlled, unnatural zone. Then, the anomaly appeared in the acoustic data. At first it was barely noticeably low rhythmic thrumming buried deep beneath the residual faint static. As the hydrophone was lowered into the extreme depths, the thrumming grew powerful, clean, and dominant. It was the pulse cycling with perfect, unwavering precision. The scientists, in a moment of profound reflection and intellectual curiosity, gathered around the playback machine, a simple phonograph with a cone speaker. What they heard was the secret algorithm of sound, a deep, resonant tone that felt physical, vibrating in the chest cavity. The cold and analytical realization was immediate. This was not a natural sound. Nature is chaotic. This was structure. Dr. Elias Finch, the lead scientist, was the first to recognize the mathematical structure. He had the sound transcribed onto paper, using a hand-cranked stylus plotter to visually render the waveform. The resulting fragile roll of thermal paper showed not a chaotic mess, but a series of distinct, nested harmonics that could only be generated by intelligent, immense machinery. This was the first definitive non-visual proof of the hidden truth. The hydrophone, due to its lack of electrical filtering, provided raw data that was too pure to deny. It registered the fundamental frequency of the pulse, precisely 0.23 to 5 Hz, the signature of the 4.3-second cycle. This perfect regularity, sustained over hours, eliminated any possibility of whale song or geological venting. It was a signal generator of unimaginable power. The immediate reaction from Captain Thorne was one of intense quiet dread. He ordered the recording to be repeated dozens of times, using fresh wax cylinders. He knew he was accumulating classified evidence that would fundamentally change the way humanity viewed its own planet. He wrote, "We have captured the sound of the engine beneath the Earth's engine." The vulnerability of the simple analog hydrophone became its greatest strength. Because it was purely mechanical, it could operate where early electrical equipment would fail, allowing it to document the core power of the anomaly without burning out. It was a passive listener, forced to capture a signal that was never meant for human ears. The existence of the wax cylinders, containing the raw, unfiltered sound, drove the ONI's systematic erasure of the entire project. They could lie about a structural failure, but they could not lie about the acoustic evidence. The classified protocol dictated the immediate destruction of every original wax cylinder, along with the analog hydrophone itself, which was declared damaged beyond repair and quietly dumped at sea, adding another piece of steel architecture to the abyss. However, the hidden truth was preserved by a small act of defiance. Before the cylinders were destroyed, Dr. Finch had the most critical moments of the recordings, specifically the 2355 event transferred onto copper photographic plates, converting the sound waves into physical light patterns. This encrypted data, stored as a visual file, was deemed a technical curiosity and thus survived the initial purge. This was the analytical framework for the subsequent decades of quiet dread. The final hour of the Vanguard's existence is documented by the hydrophone in chilling detail. The recordings show the cables cycling regularly, suddenly pausing. This 10-second silence, captured perfectly on the wax, was interpreted in later analyses as the anomaly focusing its energy. Then came the final, overwhelming sonic spike. The hydrophone, designed to withstand deep-sea pressure, recorded a sound so powerful that it physically etched the delicate wax surface, leaving microscopic scoring marks. The sound wave itself was so violent that it damaged the recording medium. The surviving copies, later converted into magnetic tape, all show this signature, a clean white-hot line of energy that instantly ends. The hydrophone captured the ship's final, violent moment of acoustic termination. The cold and analytical review of this data in the 1960s confirmed that the sound wave contained a destructive level of acoustic energy, far beyond anything known to human science. It was not a conventional explosion. It was a localized, focused application of sonic pressure. The analog hydrophone thus became the only surviving witness to the Vanguard's murder. The very simplicity of the instrument reinforced the terrifying nature of the anomaly. If a primitive brass bell could capture such immense, structured power, what force was required to generate it? This intellectual curiosity fueled the subsequent Cold War arms race in deep-sea listening. I scrambled to build better, more sensitive hydrophones, all secretly aimed at monitoring the silent cartographer. The faint static that had defined the early stages of the project returned after the destruction. This time it was interpreted as the lingering ambient noise of the disturbed water column, the ghost of the implosion, a constant, auditory reminder of the tragedy, now layered over the rhythmic hum of the deep. The ONI's subsequent efforts focused on denying the fidelity of the analog hydrophone's output. They commissioned false reports suggesting the pressure cable had shorted, creating the sound spike. But the simple, non-electrical nature of the instrument made this narrative structurally weak. The hidden truth remained in the photographic plates. The perfect, mathematical geometry of the acoustic structure could only be artificial. The engineers who later studied the hydrophone's surviving schematics felt a profound reflection and quiet dread. They realized that the best defense against the anomaly might be the very simplicity. The Vanguard possessed a machine too simple to trigger a complex counter-response. Their advanced, digital sonar arrays, built with modern steel architecture, risked being far more provocative. The legacy of the analog hydrophone is that it established the core boundary condition of deep-sea surveillance, that one can listen, but one cannot interfere. The instrument was passive, yet its mere presence was enough to trigger a response. The cold air of the archive seems to protect not just the documents, but the memory of this critical, passive role. The hydrophone's raw recording allowed future analysts to understand the encrypted nature of the cable. It was a language of frequency and pressure, a secret algorithm of sound. The file containing the spectrograms proves that the sound was structured data, constantly updating a model of the planet. We pause on the final, cold and analytical realization derived from the hydrophone data. The sound was not coming from a single point, but from an immense, diffused area of the trench. The anomaly was not a physical object, but a systemic networker, continuous, planetary operation. The Vanguard was destroyed not by a creature or a machine, but by a field of highly advanced ambient technology. The hydrophone, a simple brass bell, was a time traveler. It captured the pre-WWI world's first clear signal from a vast alien intelligence. Its truth was immediately classified and deliberately erased. But the acoustic signature remains the undisputed sonic proof of the Silent Cartographers. The Analog Hydrophone gave the US Navy its first classified look at the anomaly's signature, but its data was incomplete and fragile. Decades later, during the deepest tensions of the Cold War, a Soviet nuclear submarine, equipped with advanced, filtered sonar, picked up the exact same 4.3-second pulse beneath the Arctic ice. The Russians called it the Brezhnev signal. In the next chapter we follow the ultimate betrayal, as the Soviets attempt to interpret the signal not as an algorithm to be feared, but as a communication to be answered. The destruction of the USS Vanguard was auditory. Its classified secret was preserved not in text, but in a visual file. These fragile sheets, derived from the wax cylinder recordings, are the direct evidence of the deep-sea anomaly. They show the rhythmic pulse cycling every 4.3 seconds, not as random noise, but as perfectly structured, non-biological data. The US Navy immediately erased the existence of these records, recognizing the hidden truth that the deep ocean was being mapped by an intelligence far superior to our own. The spectrograms are a secret algorithm of sound, encrypted within a continuous low-frequency hum, revealing complex geometries that defy natural seismic activity. This visual proof of an active continental-scale surveillance system became the intellectual core of the Office of Naval Intelligence's quiet dread for decades. The file was stamped "Never open," yet we begin tonight by reviewing the visual evidence in the archive. The only sound is the quiet hum of the climate control, maintaining the precise cold air required for the preservation of antique photographic paper. We are looking at the spectrograms themselves, long, narrow strips of chemical-treated paper where the vertical axis represents frequency and the horizontal time. The ink has faded with secrets, but the central pattern remains sharp and unnerving. It is a precise repetitive waveform, a series of thin, dark horizontal lines intersected by a vertical bar every 4.3 seconds. This pattern, this cold and analytical footprint of the sound, is the most powerful piece of evidence we possess. It is a terrifying glimpse into a non-human conversation. The creation of the spectrograms was an act of profound intellectual curiosity by Dr. Elias Finch, the lead scientist aboard the Vanguard. In the early 1900s, turning sound into a visual medium was a meticulous analog process. Finch used a custom-built, heat-sensitive stylus plotter connected mechanically to the analog hydrophone. His goal was to make the sonic data of the deep cold and analytical, stripping away the subjective experience of listening to reveal the objective structure. When the acoustic anomaly, the pulse first registered powerfully in the deep trenches, Finch immediately began plotting the wave. He expected the messy, jagged peaks characteristic of turbulent water or seismic friction. Instead, the stylus drew a pattern of terrifying, geometric purity. The waveform was smooth, deep, and perfectly rhythmic. The resulting spectrograms were unlike anything ever recorded in geological or marine science. They showed the low-frequency hum of the pulse as a dense, dark band near the base of the frequency spectrum. This band was punctuated by an extremely thin, high-amplitude vertical line repeating precisely every 4.3 seconds. This repetition, the very essence of the secret algorithm of sound, was the first evidence of intelligence. The quiet dread among the scientists was immediate. The perfect, machine-like rhythm meant they were dealing not with an environmental phenomenon, but with a form of systematic activity. Captain Thorne, viewing the spectrograms in the dim flicker of the oil lamp, noted that the paper looked like a musical score written for a leviathan, too perfect to be natural. The initial intellectual curiosity quickly shifted to intense analysis. Dr. Finch began comparing the Capel's spectrograms with other known sources: earthquakes, whale calls, even early industrial sounds. Every comparison failed. The Capel's had no harmonic overtones. It was pure, fundamental frequency, a sonic signature that seemed manufactured. Furthermore, the width of the vertical lines subtly varied, leading Finch to realize that the sound wasn't just pulsing, it was transmitting data. This visual file, the spectrogram, was the first physical object to be marked with the highest classified designation, K47 alpha. The image itself became the symbol of the hidden truth. The patterns revealed complex, nested geometries that could not be explained by simple pressure dynamics. The scientists theorized the vertical bar represented the sweep, and the horizontal band represented the data return, a method of planetary X-ray. When the Vanguard was destroyed, the spectrograms became the single most dangerous piece of evidence the US Navy possessed. They proved that the sinking was not accidental. Admiral Ewell of the ONI, viewing the spectrograms, realized that the erasure had to be absolute. The visual data was too compelling. The patterns left no room for the structural failure lie. The original spectrogram paper was ordered destroyed by fire, but not before a small, isolated team of technicians, driven by their own quiet dread and intellectual curiosity, made higher-resolution glass plate copies. These copies were disguised as preliminary wave propagation studies and were labeled with deliberately misleading dates, creating an encrypted shadow archive. The survival of these photographic plates is the central paradox of the original paper was burned, but the glass plates, being more durable, survived by being They were stored in vaults designed for geological survey data, far away from the naval intelligence file. The analysis of the spectrograms continued in secret during the 1950s and 60s, using early computing power to analyze the line widths. The cold and analytical result was startling. The vertical lines contained mathematical constants and prime number sequences. The spectrograms were not merely a record of sound, they were a record of immense computation. The anomaly was processing planetary data in real time. The great fear surrounding the spectrograms was not that the anomaly existed, but that its visual footprint suggested perfect predictability. The pattern never wavered. The 4.3-second cycle was maintained with zero deviation over weeks of continuous recording. This level of stability pointed to a technological infrastructure operating on a geological, not a human, timescale. The intellectual curiosity among the analysts led to the terrifying conclusion that the spectrograms represented the source's mapping methodology. They determined that the rhythmic pulse was synchronized with the planet's internal pressure fluctuations. The spectrograms were a visual dictionary of the planet's deep stresses and strains, information that could predict catastrophic events with terrifying accuracy. This elevated the file from a historical curiosity to a strategic weapon, requiring the highest level of classified secrecy, the steel architecture of the military. Data centers that housed the spectrogram copies reflected the quiet dread felt by the intelligence community. The rooms were sealed, shielded against electromagnetic interference, and kept perpetually cold. The cold air was a physical metaphor for the analytical detachment required to study a truth so profound and unsettling. One of the most disturbing features visible on the spectrograms is the moment the pulse ceased, the dense horizontal line and the vertical sweep simply stopped. There is a clean white space on the paper, representing exactly 10 seconds of absolute acoustic silence. Following this blank space, the paper shows a brief, but massive, black spike, the visual representation of the pressure wave that destroyed the Vanguard. The spectrograms provide the ultimate cold and analytical proof of the attack. The silence was the moment of targeting, and the spike was the moment of destruction. The ONI's systematic erasure attempts were largely focused on discrediting the spectrogram's authenticity. They fabricated a rival file containing false acoustic data, designed to show randomized deep-sea noise. This fake document, however, lacked the internal mathematical consistency of the original. The spectrograms were simply too mathematically precise to be duplicated by human fraud. The hidden truth of the spectrograms is their implicit warning. They show that the anomaly has no interest in human surface activity. Its focus is entirely geological. The Vanguard was destroyed because it interfered with the fidelity of the planetary X-ray process. The spectrograms are a visual record of an intrusion being corrected. The faint static present on the edges of the early recordings, visible as a light gray haze on the spectrograms, was ultimately identified as the Analog Hydrophone's own induced noise. When the capsules activated fully, that haze vanished, replaced by the clean, distinct lines of the anomaly. This meant that the source was powerful enough to acoustically overwhelm the natural noise of the deep, creating a zone of unnerving, sonic clarity. The spectrograms became the foundation for the Navy's entire Cold War acoustic doctrine. The effort to build silent submarines was secretly driven by the knowledge that the secret algorithm of sound was constantly listening. The goal was to make American vessels acoustically invisible to the deep sea mapper, ensuring they never again created the destructive interference that doomed the Vanguard. This decades-long strategic investment was predicated entirely on the visual evidence contained within those fragile, mislabeled photographic plates. The most intense reflection on the spectrograms occurred during the early days of digital computing, when analysts were able to zoom in on the vertical lines. They discovered that the lines were not uniform, but contained a highly complex internal subpattern, a secondary layer of encrypted data within the core frequency. The analysts, filled with quiet dread, labeled this subpattern the fractal key, realizing the algorithm's complexity was almost infinite. The spectrograms are a perfect example of institutional failure and individual intellectual curiosity. The Naval Command sought to erase the truth, while scientists, captivated by the mathematical purity of the anomaly, risked everything to preserve the visual proof. The spectrograms themselves remain the purest historical artifact of Project K-47, an objective, visual transcript of an event that history claims never happened. We close on the simple, yet profound, geometry of the spectrograms, the unwavering horizontal line and the rhythmic vertical ticks. It is a signature of immense, cold, analytical power. It is the visual record of the heartbeat of the deep, a rhythm that began long before human history and continues today. The spectrograms provided the chilling visual proof of the anomaly for the U.S. Navy, but the CAPOLS, the secret algorithm of sound, continued its broadcasts into the 1960s, where its signal was picked up by the most sensitive sonar array ever deployed, the Soviet deep submergence vehicle Krasny Oktyabr. This time, the signal was interpreted not as a danger to be avoided, but as an encrypted message to be answered. In the next chapter, we uncover the Soviet reaction to the visual patterns, a direct unauthorized attempt at contact, known only as the Brezhnev Protocol. The ultimate terror of the deep is contained in a single number, 4.3 seconds, that is, the precise, unvarying cycle time of the non-natural pulse, the colossal, low-frequency sound that proved the existence of the deep-sea anomaly. This pulse was too slow to be a mammal, too structured to be a geological event, and far too powerful to be human technology. The discovery of this rhythmic signal instantly became the highest classified secret of the U.S. Navy, leading to the total erasure of the USS Vanguard and its crew. The pulse data, captured on a single, encrypted copper file, suggested the sound was generated by forces capable of harnessing geological energy, a hidden truth that shattered the notion of human planetary dominance. The spectral analysis showed the power output was continental in scale, a quiet, methodical force charting the globe from below. The file was stamped "Never open," yet we begin tonight by settling into the auditory evidence, the magnetic tape copy of the 1907 recording. The only sound is the low rhythmic hum of the tape head reading the data, a faint, hypnotic background presence that seems to slow the passage of time. We are reviewing the cold and analytical notes of Dr. Elias Finch, who first analyzed the pulse. The document notes the complete absence of distortion or decay in the signal over hours of recording, a physical impossibility for a natural sound traveling thousands of miles. The cold air of the vault is essential to preserve the magnetic oxide, a physical attempt to contain the terrifying energy signature captured on this fragile media. The non-natural pulse was defined by its singularity, its immense power coupled with its profound slowness. Normal deep-sea sounds, whale calls, tectonic shifts, distant storms are characterized by high frequencies, rapid decay, and chaotic patterns. The CAPOLS, as it was designated, was the opposite, a massive, sustained resonance in the subsonic range, a sound that was felt more than heard. Captain Thorne's intellectual curiosity led him to deploy every available pressure sensor and acoustic device when the pulse was first detected. His initial analysis, documented in his encrypted journal, noted the sheer physical imposition of the sound. The low frequency caused a persistent vibration throughout the Vanguard's hull, a quiet dread felt by the entire crew, even those not in the instrument room. It was an involuntary, physical experience of the anomaly. The first scientific measurement of the pulse's power was conducted by Dr. Finch, using the analog hydrophone data and applying complex manual calculations for energy dissipation in water. Finch estimated the source power to be equal to the continuous output of dozens of large contemporary power stations, or focused into a single acoustic beam. The chilling conclusion was that the source was drawing energy on a scale completely outside the bounds of human industrial capability in 1907. It was too powerful. The cold and analytical realization that followed was that the pulse's energy source had to be geological, not mechanical in the human sense. The only way to generate that sustained, immense power was by tapping into the planet's own thermal or kinetic energy, harnessing the immense forces of the continental plates. The pulse was the audible exhaust of a planetary engineering project. The pace of the pulse one cycle precisely every 4.3 seconds made it too slow to be a warning or a biological rhythm. It was a methodical clockwork process. In the archive, we review the earliest spectrograms, the fragile visual file that captures this rhythm. The line is mathematically perfect, indicating zero deviation over the span of the recording. This lack of fluctuation became the key evidence that the source was artificial and maintained by an immense regulatory system. The ONI's quiet dread upon receiving the final acoustic analysis was palpable. They recognized that the hidden truth was not just a threat, but a profound humiliation. The pulse was a continuous testament to a technology that made human naval power obsolete. The very notion that an unseen massive force was using the planet as its laboratory required the most aggressive level of erasure. The official cover story, citing structural failure, collapsed completely when naval engineers later reviewed the pulse's theoretical energy output. They understood that no conventional hull could survive being caught in the near-field range of such a massive sonic sweep. The non-natural pulse was, by its nature, destructive to anything in its path, making the sinking of the Vanguard not an accident, but a mathematically predictable event. The core of the classified secret was the understanding that the pulse was an active, intentional action, a continuous operation. It wasn't a one-time event, it was a permanent feature of the deep ocean. Dr. Finch's final notes, preserved because they were encrypted, referred to the pulse as the deep breath, a slow, rhythmic intake and outflow of geological information. The systematic erasure implemented by Admiral Ewell focused heavily on suppressing all scientific papers that dealt with low-frequency wave propagation. Any academic attempting to publish research on subsonic maritime physics in the following decades found their work inexplicably blocked or dismissed. A quiet, pervasive censorship designed to isolate the Capul's data. Word count check, approximately 1,700 words. Continuing the narration to meet the 3,500 to 4,500 word requirement. Part 2, the too slow to powerful nature of the pulse created a major challenge for intelligence analysts during the Cold War. In the 1960s, American acousticians using advanced computers to analyze the recovered photographic plates attempted to determine the geographic spread of the pulse. Their intellectual curiosity was immense, but the results were terrifying. The pulse was detected across vast segments of the Pacific, suggesting the source was not a single point but a network, or a diffused field of energy spanning thousands of miles. The power was so great that it remained audible even when the hydrophones were placed on opposite sides of the ocean basin. This anomaly led to the theory that the pulse was not traveling through the water, but through the solid bedrock of the oceanic crust, using the Earth itself as a massive resonating chamber. The cold and analytical realization, the pulse was too powerful because it was utilizing the planet's own resonant frequency to transmit its algorithm. It was the sound of the planet singing to itself, and the Vanguard had simply tuned in to the concert. The quiet dread among the later analysts stemmed from the mathematical purity of the 4.3-second cycle. The spectrograms revealed zero jitter or variability, a precision impossible for any moving mechanical system, suggesting a fixed, subterranean infrastructure maintaining the rhythm with perfect accuracy. This file, this silent evidence, indicated technology far beyond human comprehension. The classified priority became monitoring the pulse's slow variations. While the cycle time was fixed, the harmonic structure within the pulse varied slowly over months and years, leading analysts to realize the secret algorithm of sound was constantly updating its planetary model. The pulse was getting too slow in its updates, which the scientists interpreted as evidence that the mapping was reaching deeper, more complex geological layers. The faint static that had accompanied the analog hydrophone recording was ultimately attributed to the magnetic interference created by the massive current required to generate the pulse. The non-natural pulse was so powerful that it created localized electromagnetic disturbances, further cementing the idea of a colossal, engineered power source. The hidden truth contained in the archival records points to a single, terrifying scenario. The purpose of the too powerful pulse was not communication or warfare, but maintenance. The immense sonic energy was theorized to be used for structural manipulation, applying precise, low-frequency pressure waves to the planet's crust to monitor and perhaps regulate tectonic movement. The Vanguard was destroyed because it represented a sonic disturbance in a highly calibrated, automated system. The steel architecture of the modern Navy's data centers was designed to contain and analyze the continuous stream of data related to the cable, which continued to be monitored decades after the Vanguard's sinking. The government's approach shifted from initial erasure to continuous, encrypted surveillance. They couldn't stop the pulse, so they decided to listen to it in secret. The final piece of cold and analytical evidence that confirmed the pulse was too slow, too powerful was revealed by Dr. Reed's 1965 study. He calculated that if the cables were to increase its frequency even marginally, the resulting resonant wave could trigger seismic failure across an entire continental plateau, planetary weapon of mass destruction contained entirely in a slow rhythmic hum. The persistence of the 4.3-second cycle defines the ongoing quiet dread of the archival project. It is a slow, steady, continuous heartbeat echoing from the deep, an unceasing reminder of the anomaly's permanence. The cold air of the archive seems necessary to chill the visceral fear evoked by this sound. The non-natural pulse remains the ultimate classified information because it proves that the Earth is not simply a passive geological entity. The too powerful sound demonstrates that the planet is either hosting or is itself an immense, active machine operating on an entirely alien agenda. The erasure of the Vanguard's fate was a desperate attempt to maintain human psychological stability against this profound, unsettling truth. We close on the simple mathematical terror contained in that one repeating number. 4.3 seconds. It is the signature of the silent cartographer, a pulse too slow for human panic, and too powerful for human resistance. The non-natural pulse remained a terrifying classified signal for the American government, leading to decades of encrypted acoustic warfare. But across the world, the Soviet Union was also listening. What happened when the too slow, too powerful signal was intercepted by the USSR, leading them to misinterpret the rhythm as a deliberate interstellar communication? In the next chapter, we uncover the Soviets' chilling decision to answer the pulse, leading directly to the creation of the disastrous Brezhnev Protocol. The ultimate lie concerning the USS Vanguard was not the claim of a rogue storm. It was the official classification of the evidence. When the acoustic data confirmed the existence of the deep-sea anomaly, the Office of Naval Intelligence ONI did not deny it outright. They simply applied a semantic defense. The entire archive was labeled a geophysical hazard, a term so sterile and mundane that it instantly neutralized a terrifying hidden truth. This bureaucratic action was the deepest form of erasure. The truth was kept, but its context, the implication of non-human intelligence, was meticulously removed and the entire file stamped with a maximum security, classified rating. This label, still visible on the surviving documents, is an encrypted message in itself, confirming that the threat was considered real, pervasive, and non-military. The classification ensured that decades of intellectual curiosity would be channeled into studying planetary physics, rather than alien architecture. The file was stamped "Never open," yet we begin tonight ... by reviewing the original classification stamp. The stamp is a stark, black ink mark on yellowing paper, containing a single line of text, GPH7 alpha. The only sound in this part of the archive is the low, consistent hum of the air filtration system, a sound that mirrors the bureaucratic efficiency that contained this secret. We are sitting in a space built of steel architecture, designed to outlast human memory. The cold air is not just for preservation. It feels like the deliberate chill of analytical detachment, the emotional vacuum required to commit such a profound act of historical deception. The ONI realized that the strongest protection against the anomaly was not a weapon, but a label. The decision to use the Geophysical Hazard label, or GPH, was the brainchild of Admiral U, the founding director of the ONI. He recognized that the evidence, the spectrograms and Captain Thorne's encrypted logs, was too scientifically robust to be dismissed as hallucination or sabotage. The non-natural pulse was simply too real. Therefore, the strategy shifted from denial to defanging. The core of the quiet dread felt by the ONI leadership was this. They knew the anomaly was structured and immense, but they had no evidence of hostile, intentionally destructive competence. They theorized the pulse was an automated, mechanical process, and the Vanguard's sinking was an incidental side effect, like a fly hitting a windshield. To admit this publicly would create panic and confirm the world was not under human control. The GPH7 alpha classification achieved two critical, cold and analytical goals. First, resource allocation. By labeling the incident a geophysical hazard, the ONI could legally requisition immense federal funding for deep-sea seismic monitoring and tectonic stability. research. This allowed them to build advanced acoustic arrays, the very technology needed to monitor the cupoles without attracting political or scientific suspicion. The hidden truth funded decades of unacknowledged surveillance. Second, intellectual isolation. The label instantly channeled all intellectual curiosity away from the actual source. If an academic found a redacted file labeled Geophysical Hazard, they would assume it concerned volcanic risk, deep-sea currents, or unstable methane vents. No one would connect the term to a structured, rhythmic, too powerful sonic signal created by non-human intelligence. It was a semantic firewall. The process of erasure was carried out with chilling efficiency under this GPH classification. All personnel records of the Vanguard crew were systematically purged and refiled under GPH-related casualty simulations. But the existence of the Analog Hydrophone was dissolved into a generalized inventory of obsolete seismic testing devices. This ensured that the human element and the technological context were completely severed from the dangerous scientific data. The spectrograms themselves, the most critical visual file, were not destroyed, but were transferred to the National Geophysical Data Center (NGDC) archives, rather than the Naval Intelligence Archives. This was a classic bureaucratic decoy. Stored in the NGDC, they were safe from Navy budget cuts, but buried among millions of seismic where they looked like nothing more than a curious, low-frequency event from 1907. The ONI created a fake file to back up the GPH classification. This document, the Yule Report of 1910, provided highly complex, but ultimately flawed, mathematical models arguing that the Caples was the result of a deep mantle hyperresonance, a natural acoustic phenomenon caused by the Earth's core spinning at an uneven rate. This lie was so complicated, technical, and full of dense jargon that no civilian scientist would ever attempt to replicate the model, reinforcing the deception with complexity. The quiet dread within the ONI was rooted in the knowledge that they had to maintain two parallel realities: the public reality of structural failure, and the classified reality of the GPH every time a new acoustic array picked up the non-natural pulse. The intelligence community felt a surge of cold air and fear, a reminder that their careful semantic construct was only as strong as their capacity for silence. The encrypted nature of the evidence was addressed by the GPH classification through omission. The ONI simply ignored the encrypted logs of Captain Thorne. Since the official classification defined the event as geological, anything referencing intelligence, pattern, or intent, which was the content of the encrypted journal, was deemed unrelated and psychologically destabilizing, and locked away in a separate, sealed vault. The ONI deliberately fractured the evidence to prevent a coherent picture from emerging. The long-term success of the GPH-7 alpha label is a masterclass in bureaucratic suppression. For decades, every subsequent detection of the Caples by military or scientific vessels, and there were many, was automatically funneled back through the GPH system, where it was cold and analytically integrated into the mantle hyperresonance model. The system was self-sealing and self-justifying. The steel architecture of the later Cold War surveillance network was fundamentally shaped by this label. All hydrophone arrays built by the US Navy were classified as geophysical monitoring arrays, ostensibly looking for Soviet submarines, but secretly calibrated to filter and track the 4.3-second pulse above all else. The ONI was using the cover of the Cold War to pursue the hidden truth of the anomaly. The faint static that characterized the original 1907 recording continued to appear on subsequent naval sonar, especially in the North Pacific. The ONI interpreted this static not as electrical noise, but as the residual acoustic signature of the non-natural PUSIA persist, low-level interference that proved the system was still active, still mapping. This persistent interference became its own classified file. The quiet dread extended to the few analysts who worked exclusively on the GPH data. They were subjected to intense psychological screenings, ensuring they could maintain the cold and analytical distance necessary to study evidence that suggested non-human control over planetary dynamics. They were told explicitly that their job was to manage the geophysical threat, never to speculate on its origin. The irony of the GPH label became particularly sharp in the 1960s. During the peak of the space race, while the public and scientific community were focused on searching for signals from outer space settings, the ONI was aggressively erasing the evidence of a powerful, structured intelligence operating from within the planet, classifying it as merely a pressure gradient. The true scientific anomaly was deliberately filed under the most boring possible category. The GPH classification created a profound intellectual challenge. For the few scientists who stumbled across the raw data, they would see the spectrograms that too powerful, too slow rhythmic patterns. Their intellectual curiosity would be instantly dismissed by the label. The geophysical hazard stamp was a permanent filter on perception, ensuring that the encrypted pattern of sound remained unseen in plain sight. The cold air of the archive seems to protect the integrity of the lie as much as the integrity of the evidence. The GPH designation has outlived the politicians who created it and the original scientists who feared the hidden truth. It is a testament to the power of semantics and historical erasure. The most significant aspect of the GPH classification is its permanence. Even today, the protocols established under GPH-7 Alpha remain active, guiding the Navy's response to any unexplained low-frequency maritime sound. The core directive is always the same: do not investigate origin, only measure and monitor the effect. The initial quiet dread has been institutionalized into a permanent, cold and analytical state of surveillance. The ONI's choice to use the geophysical hazard label was a brilliant maneuver that successfully turned a terrifying existential threat into a boring, manageable bureaucratic file. The classified secret was preserved, but the philosophical impact was nullified. We close on the simple yet profound reality of the label. The anomaly is still active, still pulsing every 4.3 seconds, still mapping the deep. And for over a century, the US government's official explanation for the loss of a warship remains a few lines of technical jargon, filed neatly under a term that means everything and nothing: geophysical hazard. The ONI's classified geophysical hazard label ensured that the US Navy spent decades trying to avoid the anomaly. But across the globe, the Soviet Union, driven by a desperate Cold War need for intelligence, intercepted the exact same cable. They saw the rhythmic, powerful signal not as a threat to be avoided, but as an encrypted code to be broken. In the next chapter, we uncover the Soviet attempt to communicate with the Silent Cartographers, leading to the creation of the disastrous and highly the Brezhnev Protocol. The ultimate proof of the classified cover-up surrounding the deep-sea anomaly is not found in the acoustic data, but in the total erasure of human existence. Following the loss of the USS Vanguard, the US Navy initiated a purge so thorough that Captain Thorne and his entire crew were rendered statistical ghosts. Their names, service records, and even their recruitment files were removed from the Naval Registry and categorized under the bland label non-recoverable assets. This was the true hidden truth, the government's chilling, cold and analytical realization that they had to eliminate the witnesses to neutralize the secret. They didn't just suppress the data, they erased the people who had faced the anomaly. This massive act of administrative violence ensured that no future investigator could ever trace the non-natural pulse back to the men who first heard it, sealing the terrible secret within an encrypted bureaucratic void. The file was stamped "Never open," yet we begin tonight by settling into the vast, empty space left behind by the purge. The only sound is the quiet hum of the archive's automated filing system, where records that should exist are instead marked with a chilling, single-line VOID. We are reviewing the master index for Project K47, a list of names with no attached files, a catalog of non-existence. The steel architecture of the filing cabinets reflects the sterility of the act. The cold air of the room is a physical manifestation of the moral vacuum created by the Office of Naval Intelligence (ONI). The absence of these men is the most profound evidence of the classified event. The purging of the personnel records was not an act of panic, but a deliberate, strategic decision by Admiral Ewell. He understood that while the and the copper cylinder could be classified as a geophysical hazard, the Crutha human element represented an uncontrollable liability. A bereaved family member, a former colleague, or a surviving relative possessed the intellectual curiosity to ask dangerous questions that could unravel the entire erasure process. Began immediately after the sinking was officially declared a structural failure. The cold and analytical precision of the purge was terrifying. First, all active service records were seized. Names like Captain Silas Thorne and Chief Petty Officer Marcus Dale were systematically removed from the active duty roster. The physical paper files were not simply shredded, they were microfilmed, and the originals were transferred to a highly secure, non-indexed vault labeled Project Kronos outside of Washington, D.C., ensuring they would never appear in a standard search query. Next came the administrative obliteration. The crew were not recorded as killed in action or lost at sea. Instead, their status was changed to decommissioned. Classification set an alpha. This obscure label, borrowed from accounting procedures for lost inventory, legally redefined the crew as equipment rather than human beings. This bureaucratic maneuver stripped them of the customary honors and inquiries that followed a naval tragedy, preventing any public reflection on their service. This action was the truest form of the hidden truth. The purge extended to every known contact point. The ONI established a special liaison team to handle the families. These officers, operating with quiet dread, delivered the official notice. Due to the extreme conditions and the classified nature of the vessel's components, number remains were recoverable, and all personal effects were considered contaminated and destroyed. The families were given generous, encrypted compensation packages tied to ironclad, lifetime non-disclosure agreements, effectively buying their silence and eliminating the human source of potential information leakage. The ONI's profound intellectual curiosity was focused not on the anomaly, but on controlling the narrative around it. They studied the personal histories of the crew who had closest relatives, who was politically connected, who had a tendency toward intellectual speculation. This research was compiled into a classified file called USS Vanguard, a terrifying record detailing how to neutralize the social footprint of each lost man. The purging of Chief Petty Officer Marcus Dale's records was particularly meticulous, because his ingenuity, the creation of the copper cylinder, represented the ultimate act of defiance. The ONI sought to neutralize his very genius. All documentation regarding his engineering expertise, his non-conventional training, and his patents were either erased or misattributed to other, more controllable personnel. They ensured that, if the copper cylinder was ever found, the original creator's name would be impossible to trace through official channels. The faint static that sometimes registers on the old archival equipment seems to emanate from this very silence, the background noise of history where 30 men used to exist. The removal of their names left a clean white space on the naval roster, a vacuum of human experience. The crew of the Vanguard were transformed into martyrs for bureaucratic silence. They had encountered the anomaly, the non-natural pulsar. The state's response was not to protect them, but to erase them, ensuring the chilling discovery would die with them. Their deaths were tragic. Their disappearance from the file was a strategic act of cold and analytical violence. The steel architecture of the modern archive, with its rows of identical, labeled boxes, offers a strange contrast to the void created by the purge. The cold air of the vault seems to perpetuate the atmosphere of isolation and control that was central to Admiral Ewell's strategy. The long-term impact of the purging of the personnel records was the establishment of a chilling precedent within the intelligence community. The secret is always prioritized over the individual. This quiet dread permeated the Navy's response to future high-strangeness events. The lesson learned from the Vanguard was that leaving loose ends, in the form of emotional or intellectual curiosity, was the greatest threat to a classified operation. Years later, during the early days of microfilming in the 1940s, the original physical files of the Vanguard crew were subjected to a final, brutal audit. Every piece of paper was checked against the master erasure list. Any surviving correspondence or personal notes were removed and replaced with generic boilerplate discharge notices. The original documents were then incinerated, leaving only the microfilm copies stored in the Project Chronos Volta, digital prison for human history. The intellectual curiosity of future naval historians was severely crippled by this purge. Any researcher attempting to study the period would find the Vanguard's official complement impossibly small, or the crew listed under generic, non-existent names. The hidden truth was guarded by silence and statistical anomaly, protected by the very absence of information. The surviving encrypted elements, Captain Thorne's journal and Chief Petty Officer Dale's copper cylinder, were themselves artifacts of this purge. They existed only because two men realized their administrative reality was about to be erased, and they fought back using analog defiance. The copper cylinder was a time capsule. The encrypted journal was a final, desperate act of communication from the void. The ONI, in its cold and analytical assessment, determined that the emotional complexity surrounding the crew's identity was more dangerous than the physical data of the anomaly. The spectrograms could be dismissed as a geological event. The sorrow of a widow or the intellectual curiosity of a surviving scientist could not. The concept of the non-recoverable asset was also applied to the survivors of the larger Project K-47 administrative team, those who had worked in logistics but had not been aboard the ship. These individuals were not erased in the sense of death, but their records were encrypted and they were reassigned to remote, non-communicative positions, effectively guaranteeing their professional silence for the remainder of their careers. They became human footnotes to the secret, carrying the quiet dread of their knowledge until their natural deaths. The most terrifying legacy of the purging of the personnel records is the demonstration that the US government was capable of administratively dissolving 30 lives into historical non-existence. The cold air and steel architecture of the archive are a monument to this capability. We reflect on the final, cold and analytical state of the files. The names of the crew exist only in the classified, deep encrypted archives of the ONI, listed next to the data of the anomaly they discovered. They are linked to the secret, but permanently separated from the public memory. Their erasure was the necessary sacrifice to maintain the semantic defense of the geophysical hazard. The quiet dread that lingers is the realization that the hidden truth of the deep-sea pulse is not contained in the sound, but in the silence left behind by the men who heard it. Their disappearance confirms the immense, unsettling power of the anomaly. The purging of the personnel records cemented the classified reality of the deep-sea anomaly for the American government. The human cost was paid, and the erasure was complete. But across the world, the Soviet Union had begun to intercept the non-natural pulse. Seeing no human origin in the US naval archives thanks to the purge, they misinterpreted the rhythmic signal as a beacon from an intelligent, non-human source. In the next chapter, we uncover the Soviet attempt to communicate with the Silent Cartographers, leading to the creation of the disastrous and highly expensive the Brezhnev Protocol. The ultimate failure of the 1907 erasure occurred nearly a century later, in the digital age. In 2003, a civilian geological survey operating in the North Pacific detected a massive low-frequency signal. This signal, designated the echo source, was mathematically identical to the non-natural pulse that destroyed the USS Vanguard in 1907. This chilling coincident reading proved the deep-sea anomaly was not a temporary event but an active, continuous, century-long operation. The US government, still operating under the classified Geophysical Hazard Protocol, moved swiftly to intercept and seize the civilian data. Every raw data file was digitally erased from public servers, and the scientists were sworn to silence. The survival of this rhythmic pulse, a precise 4.3-second cycle, is the terrifying modern paradox. The hidden truth is that the silent cartographer never stopped mapping. The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight, by sitting in the modern archival mood, surrounded by the quiet hum of advanced servers. This is where the 2003 data would have been stored openly, had it not been intercepted. Instead, we examine the final, encrypted log entry of the civilian survey vessel, the Triton. The only sound is the low whir of the cooling fans, mirroring the deep, constant rhythm of the pulse itself. The cold air of this secure room seems to carry the chill of the deep ocean floor. We see the stark contrast between the faded, analog spectrograms of 1907 and the crisp, higher resolution digital plots of 2003. The terror is immediate and cold and analytical. The pattern is identical, proving that an immense structured intelligence has been operating continuously for 96 years. Undetected by the human surface world. The rest of the script. The modern acoustic survey was commissioned by the Scripps Institute of Oceanography, entirely independent of military or intelligence funding. Their goal was straightforward, to measure the rate of deep-sea plate subduction, using towed acoustic arrays and sophisticated high-fidelity digital recorders. Their intellectual curiosity was purely academic, focused on the gradual, massive movements of the Earth's crust. They had no knowledge of Project K-47, the Vanguard, or the classified GPH-7 alpha file that still governed Navy acoustic policy. The Triton spent 6 weeks conducting its survey across the North Pacific trenches. The data acquisition was massive, comprising terabytes of continuous high-resolution sound. The initial data processing, carried out by Dr. Lena Hansen, flagged a low-frequency anomaly early in the process. Dr. Hansen initially attributed the strange, rhythmic signature to equipment noise, as the sound was too slow, too powerful to fit any known biological or seismic model. However, the precision of the rhythm forced further investigation. The sound was registered repeatedly, cycling with a mathematical purity that defied random generation. Dr. Hansen used advanced digital filters to isolate the rhythm, and the terrifying number surfaced 4.3 seconds. This rate of pulse was maintained with a deviation of less than 1/106 seconds over an observation period of 3 days. The realization dawned with quiet dread. This was not noise. It was a highly regulated signal. The research team, driven by intense intellectual curiosity, began to search historical acoustic records for precedents. They scoured public data for low-frequency events, finding nothing that matched the structure or power of the echo source. Unbeknownst to them, the official records of 1907, the spectrograms and the wax cylinder copies were sealed and encrypted. Deep within the ONI archives, the coincident readings occurred when Dr. Han's team ran a pattern recognition algorithm on their raw data. The algorithm identified a complex substructure within the 4.3-second pulsar, layered harmonic arrangement that suggested intentional data packet transmission. When this unique pattern was cross-referenced against global acoustic patterns, it triggered a silent alarm in a highly secure, decommissioned NSA server farm, still running legacy Cold War monitoring software. This antique monitoring system, designed to track the original pulse, recognized the signature immediately. The official response was immediate and overwhelming. A joint task force composed of ONI and Department of Energy officials arrived at the Scripps facility, presenting warrants under the guise of national energy security concerns. The public narrative used the classified Geophysical Hazard label, claiming the survey risked destabilizing a major fault line. The true goal was a total and complete erasure of the evidence. Every hard drive, every digital backup, and every raw acoustic file containing the 4.3-second pulse was seized. The scientists were forced to sign non-disclosure agreements that explicitly mentioned the legal penalties for discussing unique seismic resonance data. This operation was a terrifying, cold and analytical mirror of the 1907 purge, substituting hard drives for burning paper. The hidden truth that the Navy sought to contain was the proof of continuity. The persistence of the rhythm, mathematically identical after a century of global conflict and technological leaps, proved the anomaly was not merely historical, but a permanent, operating feature of the planet. The steel architecture of the Triton's instrument room, designed for transparency and open research, quickly became the site of a silent, digital conflict. The civilian scientists, realizing the immense power of the entity they had accidentally discovered, attempted to hide backup copies of the data. However, the military team, highly trained in digital forensics, was equally efficient, carrying out a systematic erasure of all primary and tertiary digital files. One scientist, driven by quiet dread and ethical reflection, managed to retain a small, an encrypted segment of the raw acoustic data on a personal, non-networked USB drive, labeled innocuously as family photos. This tiny piece of digital evidence is the modern equivalent of Chief Petty Officer Dale's copper cylinder, a fragile defiance against the institutional lie. The coincident readings were the central focus of the classified reports generated by the ONI after the seizure. The reports confirmed that the 2003 data precisely matched the harmonic structure captured by the Analog Hydrophone in 1907. This proved that the secret algorithm of sound was still broadcasting its planetary demonstrating a technological stability that dwarfed all human scientific endeavors. The cold air of the ONI analysis lab was thick with the realization that the non-natural pulse was not merely a threat to be avoided, it was a permanent, planetary resident. The US Navy's entire acoustic strategy, predicated on avoiding detection, was now proven to be a century-long game of hide-and-seek with an immortal, systematic intelligence. The most profound element of the modern acoustic survey 2003 was the clarity of the recording. Unlike the 1907 data, which was marred by the faint static of the Vanguard's early steam engine, the 2003 recordings, taken by passive fiber optic arrays, captured the pulse in its pristine state. The high-resolution spectrograms showed the minute, fractal complexity within the 4.3-second cycle, confirming that the pulse was constantly transmitting structured, computational data. This led to a new level of quiet dread. The pulse was not just mapping geology. The data packets were so vast that they could be mapping the planet's atmospheric fluctuations, thermal gradients, and perhaps even the slow, quiet expansion of human infrastructure, everything that creates sonic interference. The anomaly was listening to the entire planet. The ONI's public response was a continuation of the strategy established by the GPH label. They issued a brief, technical press release attributing the echo source to a previously unknown type of blue whale vocalization, a deliberate and simplistic misdirection designed to extinguish scientific intellectual curiosity. The erasure of the digital file was concealed under the pretext of data corruption. The coincident readings of 2003 provide the terrifying link between the past and the present. The rhythmic, too slow, too powerful signal that destroyed a ship in the early 20th century is demonstrably still active in the digital age. The archival lesson is clear: the most profound classified secrets are often guarded not by force, but by immense patience. The hidden truth is now carried by a handful of sworn-to-silence scientists, and the one tiny encrypted USB drive. The vast scale of the digital erasure only serves to confirm the terrifying power of the anomaly. The government did not want the world to know that the sonic signature of the Vanguard's killer is still broadcasting today. We close on the cold, an analytical realization that the cable, cycling every 4.3 seconds, is the real constant in the history of the deep ocean. The ships, the scientists, and the political systems are temporary. The rhythmic hum from below is permanent. The modern acoustic survey 2003 proved the permanence of the anomaly for the American government, but the initial detection of the echo source by the civilian research team was mirrored decades earlier by the Soviets. What happened when the Soviet Navy, lacking the ONI's history of quiet dread, interpreted the coincident readings as an invitation? In the next chapter, we uncover the Soviet attempt to communicate with the Silent Cartographers, leading to the creation of the disastrous and highly experimental, the Brezhnev Protocol. The ultimate hidden truth of the USS Vanguard is that the destruction of the ship was not an end, but the beginning of an eternal rhythm. Today, the secret rests in two concurrent sounds: the pervasive, technological hum of the classified archive, and the immense, rhythmic sound of the deep, the persistent 4.3-second pulse of the anomaly. The US government's relentless erasure of every human file and record only served to emphasize the structure of the sound, proving the non-natural pulse was a permanent, non-human operation. The silence the Navy sought to impose was broken by the continuous broadcast of the Silent Cartographer. The only surviving logs are encrypted fragments, pieces of a century-long paradox, where the loudest noise is the silence of history, and the quietest sound is the most powerful. This final cold and analytical reflection confirms that the secret is not what sank the ship, but what continues to operate beneath the waves. The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight, by sinking into the hypnotic comparison of these two sounds. We are in the archive's main server room, where the quiet hum of the cooling unit creates a low, constant vibration, the sound of preserved history. It is a controlled, predictable sound, the acoustic signature of human bureaucracy. Yet, within this hum we can project the ghost of the cables, the rhythmic beat of the anomaly. The contrast is absolute: the low, chaotic hum of human technology against the immense, perfect pulse of the deep. The cold air of the archive is a thin shield, protecting us from the knowledge that the true source of power lies far beneath this steel architecture, operating on a schedule that ignores human time entirely. The quiet hum of the archive is the sound of suppression. It emanates from the climate controls, the automated fire suppression systems, and the low-frequency electromagnetic field created by the shielded servers, all elements designed not just to preserve the file, but to ensure its continued isolation. This hum is the constant acoustic reminder of the ONI's classified success in maintaining the GPH-7 alpha label. Every document, every spectrogram, and every surviving encrypted log fragment is stored within this manufactured quiet. The very atmosphere is designed to perpetuate the sense of quiet dread, a feeling that history is being held prisoner, forced into silence by technical control. When an analyst reviews the century-old data, the quiet hum of the room acts as a psychological white noise, designed to drown out the internal echo of the sound of the deep. We review the records of the purging of the personnel records. The erasure of Captain Thorne and his crew was the ONI's attempt to achieve an acoustic zero, to eliminate all human noise associated with the anomaly. Yet, the silence they created in the Naval Registry simply amplified the presence of the non-natural pulse. The silence of the dead made the continuous rhythm of the deep even louder. The sound of the deep is the cables, still cycling at $4.30 seconds. It is a too slow, too powerful rhythm that defies the human concept of historical progression. While human history is marked by the chaotic speed of wars and technological leaps, the anomaly operates at a geological tempo, its sound waves traversing the continental plates with methodical precision. The profound intellectual curiosity of the original scientists lay in analyzing this duality. They were surrounded by the steam-driven chaos and noise of the Vanguard, yet they managed to isolate the profound stillness of the anomaly's signal. The analog hydrophone, recording the pulse against the backdrop of the faint static of the ship, provided the first historical instance where human noise was definitively overwhelmed by an external, non-human intelligence. The cold and analytical truth is that the sound of the deep is a language of existence. It is not trying to communicate with us. It is simply charting its environment, and that chart includes us as small, temporary disturbances. The immense, organized power of the pulse makes the quiet hum of the archive sound like the frantic buzzing of an insect, a fleeting, insignificant sound against the permanence of the planet's internal rhythm. The Modern Acoustic Survey 2003 confirmed that the two sounds, the hum and the pulse, continued their parallel existence. The high-resolution digital spectrograms of 2003 showed the K-pulse with even greater clarity, proving that the anomaly had not degraded or ceased its operation for a single moment over the 96-year gap. The archival record is therefore not a record of a past event, but a continuous log of the present, eternally cycling beneath the surface of human affairs. The steel architecture of the archive is the ONI's fortress. Against the sound of the deep, the thick, shielded walls are designed to prevent electromagnetic or sonic intrusion, a deliberate attempt to maintain the artificial silence. Yet the sound penetrates the psychological defenses of the analysts. They are forced into cold and analytical reflection, contemplating the fact that the secret they are guarding is immense, planetary, and actively engaged in a process that may or may not include human survival. The quiet dread in the archive stems from the coincident readings. The repetition of the 4.3-second pulse proves that every act of secrecy, every erasure, and every classified protocol has been fundamentally futile against the systematic operation of the anomaly. The hidden truth is that the secret is too large to contain. The encrypted nature of the core documents, Thorne's journal, and the spectrograms is a reflection of the profound silence they sought to protect. They were locked away not because they revealed a foreign power, but because they revealed the sheer indifference of the sound of the deep. They spoke of a power that simply did not register human life. We return to the comparison of the two sounds. The quiet hum of the archive represents control, fear, and a desperate effort to maintain the illusion of human supremacy. It is a fragile electrical sound. The sound of the deep represents structure, immense power, and a geological indifference. It is a fundamental, acoustic sound. The contrast is hypnotic, pulling the listener into the paradox of the archive. The cold air in the vault ensures that the century-old paper, the tangible memory of the anomaly, remains structurally sound, ready to confirm the existence of the secret to future generations. The very preservation of the file is an ongoing, quiet, ethical debate. Is it better to preserve the truth and maintain the dread, or allow the secret to dissolve entirely? The final cold and analytical lesson derived from the contrast of the two sounds is the immense gap in technological understanding. The ONI uses its most sophisticated steel architecture and climate controls to generate silence, whereas the anomaly uses the very fabric of the planet, the crust, the water, to generate its sound. One technology seeks to hide, the other seeks to reveal the entire planet. The quiet hum of the archive becomes the sound of resignation. It is the understanding that while the Navy successfully erased the men and the ship, they failed to stop the rhythm. The sound of the deep continues its work, a perpetual sonic sentinel beneath the waves. The entire history of the secret is contained in the continuous rhythmic conflict between these two auditory experiences. The hidden truth is that the archive itself is now part of the anomaly's environment. The pulse, cycling every 4.3 seconds, is charting the geology beneath the ONI headquarters. Beneath the very vault where its classified files are stored, the sound of the deep is literally mapping the container of its own secret. We end tonight with the sense of quiet dread solidified by this realization. The quiet hum of the archive is a temporary, fragile sound, subject to power outages and maintenance schedules. The sound of the deep is a fundamental, geological law, operating outside of human influence. The quiet hum of the archive preserves the American fear of the anomaly, but the Soviet Union, driven by a different ideology, heard the sound of the deep and drew a different conclusion. Lacking the ONI's classified history, they saw the rhythmic, powerful pulse not as a threat to be managed, but as an encrypted message to be engaged. In the final chapter, we uncover the Soviet attempt to communicate with the Silent Cartographers, leading to the creation of the disastrous and highly experimental the Brezhnev Protocol, which sought to answer the K-pulse and finally break the silence.